Hello and welcome to Libero, the podcast about what Mrs. Thatcher would never have called the most important of the least important things, because the least important things were the coal mines and the most important thing was closing them. She would, I think, have been much more likely to introduce a podcast about football as a slum sport watched by slum people. So that's you. Sorry, it's Rory again today. You can blame Wilson. He is off on the Southern Ocean for reasons that are a complete mystery to all of us. Just before we start properly, we would like to remind you that Libero kind of relies on your goodwill to reach as many people as possible. We don't have a big production company behind us. It is literally just Tom. And we don't have a Magwitch-style benefactor called Gary. So we do need you to like and subscribe on YouTube, to leave nice comments and ratings on Apple, and to do the same on Spotify. It really helps us rise up the algorithm and get to more people so we can compete with podcasts of the quality of The Good, The Bad and The Football, the one that has Mick McCarthy on it, and stick to water polo or whatever's happening now. But today I'm joined by John Brewin and Jack Pitt-Brooke of The Athletic. I find this a bit weird that I keep having to put our employers like after our names. Should we not get our own identities?
I don't have an identity independent of my employment. Do you?
No, I genuinely don't. I was going to say we should maybe start introducing ourselves by like our hobbies. So we could say that John obviously is a noted music fan, an aficionado in a lot of ways, but I don't have any hobbies or interests apart from football, the watching of football and writing about it, and increasingly recording podcasts about football. That is the extent of my personality.
Making football podcasts, writing football pieces, parenting in that order.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my Twitter.
Like a rubbish version of the Gareth Bale flag.
Yeah.
I'm going to some museums later, actually. So there you go. It's my day off.
Multiple museums.
Yeah, because it's good if you go on your own. You can do it quickly. You see. So I'm going to Lee Miller at the Tate.
Oh yeah.
And Marie Antoinette at the V&A. There you go.
Have you seen the Lee Miller film?
Yes.
It's very good. I
It's
enjoyed it.
Very good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know the story beforehand, but it's an excellent
No,
film.
neither did I. Yeah, it's excellent actually. Yeah.
What's the Marie Antoinette exhibition?
It's her style thing, so I think it's like a fashion type of thing, which obviously, fashion is a big part of my makeup, Rory, as you know.
Absolutely.
Barney, our friend, told me it's very good, so I shall make my way down.
Do you see yourself as a Marie Antoinette figure, like the Marie Antoinette of Bethnal Green?
Let them eat fish and chips or whatever. Yeah. No, I'm very interested in the French Revolution. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Which side do you come down on?
Which side?
Yeah.
Well, it all got a bit divisive in the end. What do you think? Like Robespierre, Danton, all that stuff. What's the quote? Isn't it from? Is it Mao Zedong? What was it? What we don't know yet.
Xu Enlai.
Was it Xu Enlai? Yeah. He said that.
It's too early to tell.
It's too early to tell.
I actually used that line in a podcast talking about Tottenham's transfer window in the summer of 2024 recently, and in the course of Googling it, I found that in fact when Xu Enlai said that, he thought he was referring to the student protests in Paris in 1968, not the actual French Revolution at the end of the 18th century. But it's obviously passed into the ether as being Xu Enlai's comment on the events of the 1780s and 90s.
Is it too early to tell about the 1968 riots in France? It probably is, They're still at it over there.
They are. Well, it kind of confirmed France's love of a strike. I always feel slightly like culturally intimidated by the rest of you, because all that makes me think of is that I spent yesterday researching Euro 1992 and learning that the story about the Danes coming off the beach to win it. Apparently they weren't. They were preparing for a game against the CIS. That's my cultural reference frame, which further reinforces the idea that I am one-dimensional. And now, unusually today for Libero, the misquote at the start is actually quite relevant to our subject matter. Because we're going to talk about football and politics and Margaret Thatcher. And we're doing this, Jack, because I think, are we coming up to Mrs. Thatcher's 100th birthday?
Yeah, so Monday of next week, that's the 13th of October, is her centennial, would have been her 100th birthday. And I just thought it's really important that we mark this. I mean, I actually think isn't that why Wilson's in the Falklands at the moment, making some documentary?
Wilson has gone to the Falklands. I mean, to be honest, I have no idea why Wilson's in the Falklands.
He's just retaken South Georgia again.
I'm slightly worried that Wilson has been scammed to get to Argentina. Someone has taken Wilson to Argentina for reasons that seem very flimsy, and there's a chance he doesn't come back, which would
be a big loss to the podcast, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Would it?
We'll see.
If anybody out there wants to replace Wilson on Libero, please just get in touch via our Instagram or Blue Sky or our email address with applications.
Funny enough, I keep doing this joke about being listened to by 40-year-old graphic designers, which I've stolen unapologetically from Screen Rot. But really, it turns out I think our entire audience is journalists.
Yes. All
this podcast is an exercise in finding out how many sports journalists are in Britain. So this is it's a slightly sort of weirder subject than normal, maybe a little bit more offbeat than we might have done at other times. And part of that, I think, Jack, is because anyone who's been to a Premier League game at any point in the last 30 years would probably tell you that it's really not a political space. Like there is very little evidence of politics at Premier League games. I actually wrote a piece about this a little while ago as I went to Leeds against Bournemouth, which was a very good game, and wrote about how Elland Road was in the 1980s basically a recruiting ground for the National Front. It was NF magazines being sold outside the Kop. It was kind of NF stickers in programmes, racist chanting about Jews, about black players, lots of bananas being thrown. There were lots of clubs that were affected by that in the 80s, and a lot of grounds weren't safe for black players, for Jewish players, for black, Asian, Jewish fans. But Elland Road, I think, had a reputation for being particularly bad. And I went to that game, I think, a week after the Unite the Kingdom rally, and there was nothing. There wasn't a single chant to stop the boats. The Leeds fans in the South Stand have, a couple of quite fruity chants, including one about Jimmy Savile. They're not unafraid to push the boundaries of taste, but there is no politics at all in the chanting at Elland Road these days, and I think that's pretty much true around the Premier League. When was the last time you heard anything that kind of bordered on political at a Premier League or even like a Championship game?
I suppose the only thing would be sometimes if a club from Yorkshire plays a club from Nottinghamshire, and this refers back to the miners' strike. So Nottinghamshire were the first to come off the miners' strike back in 1985, and maybe some of them didn't strike, and so far you get this chant of scabs and stuff like that, which is a historic thing. Which, I mean, it is that long ago, 40 odd years ago, that it's almost like the Southampton v Portsmouth thing, which is again like down to some historic, rights about sailors and individual ports and stuff like that. It's still political.
Although that does remind me of that. Occasionally, you'll get people who tell you that the Liverpool-Manchester United rivalry is something to do with the ship canal. The cities hate each other because of when they built the ship canal. It kind of ruined the port of Liverpool, and I'm sure that's true. But that's also very much not the reason for that rivalry. That's not why that happens.
Yeah, I've always found the Premier League to be an incredibly depoliticised space. Like there's hardly any political content within the Premier League at all. And that's not to say that English football fans don't have political views, because they do come out in other ways. But I think, frankly, more likely to come out more often further down the pyramid you go. But within the Premier League, for all sorts of reasons that we'll come on to, it's a very, very, I don't know if bland is the right word, or kind of pristine, or it's not really a space that politics enters into at all, set apart from a small number of quite contested arguments about the sort of political symbols which are allowed into Premier League football, be that the knee, the poppy, rainbow laces, that kind of thing. But in the main, certainly from the stands, I think there is barely any political content whatsoever.
It's worth pausing, I think, just a little bit on those three causes, because I'd say those are the three political elements that you get in football, reliably. The Premier League, there is a bit of pushback, a bit of a hoo-ha about all three relatively frequently. And it's interesting that two of them, I think you could say, are progressive causes, aren't they? The rainbow laces and taking the knee are unashamedly progressive causes. And what you tend to get once a year in terms of rainbow laces and vaguely, every so often with taking the knee, is people saying, well, we don't want that in the game. Why are you letting politics come into the game? And I think all three of us who would lean left, and people don't share our political views, then you don't have to tolerate listening to them for a little bit. I find it slightly ironic that the poppy is almost the opposite, that people almost resent the idea that you can interpret the poppy as a political symbol. Like, you can read the poppy as being a political gesture, whereas we've been kind of convinced in the last 20, 30 years that the poppy is apolitical in a way that I think is slightly disingenuous.
Well, I actually think all three of those causes are sold as being apolitical, right? That's how they are effectively got through the door. Is, the argument is always made by the people arguing for this being adopted is, well, it's the knee is not political, that's why it's okay to have it in football. The rainbow lace are not political, it's just it's about inclusion. Or the poppy's not political, it's about history and respect. But I think that in all three of those, I think to make that argument is to draw an incredibly narrow border around like what actually constitutes politics, whereas in fact I think all three of those have fairly obvious political, like the political elements of all three of those gestures are fairly obvious. But to bring them into this depoliticised space, which is the Premier League, and the top end of English football, they've kind of had to be dressed up as being apolitical, right?
Here's the thing, chaps. I remember when I first started going to England games, which would be 15, 20 years ago, there was always a big military presence at these games. And, for heroes or whatever was a big I don't see that so much anymore. That feels like the militaristic edge of things has been curbed a little bit. When you go to a game at Wembley, or you know what I mean? Like there was a point where when Great Britain and was serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was we had to have our boys front and centre, and it feels like that is sort of ebbed away a little bit.
I still think that's a big thing at FA Cup finals.
There's quite a lot of soldiers at cup finals, yeah.
Yeah, but that's sort of part of tradition. What I'm talking about is like an England game and stuff like that. It felt like there was a point where the military were celebrated before almost every game, and there's a certain point where, for whatever reason, it's tapered off a little bit, and I'm not sure why that is.
I think that's a really good point. I'd not thought of that. Yeah, there was a spell where, prior to that, there had been very little military presence of football matches, which is a weird.
Well, you'd have the brass band, doing
It was kind of trooping the colour military, wasn't it? It was look at our fancy uniforms from the 19th century. It was British kind of pomp and ceremony rather than actual military presence. And then you started getting like the paras dressed up.
You'd get matches. A parachute jumper dropping the FA Cup final ball in the in the middle of the field and stuff like that, and
that must have been. This sounds really glib, and I don't want it to, but like we're quite good as a country, I think, of not realising when we're actually at war. Like when the status of our nation is we are at war. So I was talking to my little boy about the Troubles the other day, and the Troubles were a civil war. We just called them the Troubles, like we had a headache. Do you know what I mean? But it was a civil war on contested British soil that we kind of gave this weird euphemism to. And at the same time, in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was distant. It wasn't like there were bombs dropping on British homes. But we were we were at war. The country was at war. The army were engaged in a military action that people have views on. Even if you ignore the rights and wrongs of that military action, like there were British soldiers dying.
Yes.
And I suppose football reflected that. Just we have this weird thing, and it intersects with kind of the depoliticised space of the Premier League, where football is how we as a society seem to express our opinions. Do you remember the big hoo-ha? I mean, I don't want to get into this subject, but do you remember was it around October the 7th that there was the big hoo-ha about whether they were going to light the Wembley Arch?
Yes. And
I remember thinking at the time, I think I had to write something for the NYT about it, like, why is this a football story? Like, why does this matter so much? But it's because football is our only, we'll come on to this a little bit later, like it's our main shared civic space, isn't it? That's the one thing that's left.
Yeah, I suppose, but most people's, observation of remembrance for the fallen in wars will be at a football match. They won't be going to a chapel on the Sundays in November. They will do it at a football match, and that's probably as much as they will do. I mean, certain towns, my hometown, Macclesfield, they do have a parade and stuff like that. Yeah, of course. But most people will think, right, okay, that's that done. And sometimes if you're doing multiple football matches over a couple of weeks, you'll have done 5 or 6 remembrance silences or whatever, and that's. But I suppose the point is, as Jack says, it is political because of what military acts represent, but at the same time, it's also part of tradition, isn't it, to do that?
Yeah, and it's a weird line. Does you think this weekend there were minute silences? Certainly at the games involving the Manchester clubs. I don't know if everybody do a minute silence.
Well, there was one at Brentford where we, and actually, this feels trite. That was the longest minute silence I've been to for quite a while. It was, but anyway, but also they remembered a chap who, the goalkeeping coach at Brentford, who had also died. So it was shared between the two, and the attacks on the synagogue was remembered as it should be for a Manchester club. Yeah.
And they brought out the armbands that kind of emerged in the aftermath of the Ariana Grande attack, the Manchester bombing. So they said City United, and that feels absolutely appropriate. I mean, would you say that's and this is a genuine question, is that a political act? I mean, my feeling is no, but I guess this shows that...
No, not at all, no. But that's you strike on a point, don't you? I suppose everything in life is political in a certain sense, and public shows of grief that they represent that as well. It's very difficult, Roy. Yeah.
Because that's the borderline. Like Jack mentions that, and that's a really interesting point as well. That like all these the few causes that we allow into football are stripped. They're like lime washed of their politics to get them through the door, aren't they? Exactly. So you get it's the Rainbow Lace is about inclusion. The poppy is about remembering the war dead, especially now that the poppy is symbolic of all the war dead. There were some good people on both sides, rather than just British soldiers. It's that in itself is a political decision around the poppy to make it more palatable, to make it less controversial. Or the one that I've forgotten, taking the knee. We are told these are not political, so it's okay, which I think is probably the best. Best illustration of how apolitical football tries to be.
But then what will happen is someone like James McClain will say, hang on, I'm not wearing this because of actions against my family and the cause that they represent in Northern Ireland and Ireland. And then you maybe have like a Serbian player that will say, hang on, what was done in the name of Britain or whatever in the Yugoslav conflict, I can't wear that. And so that almost seems like that's treated like an inconvenience, doesn't it? It's like, someone's speaking about that. And actually, they have the right to do that, don't they? That I would defend their right to take that stand. Yeah.
The one that I found really uncomfortable was Mark Gay and the rainbow armband. That Gay didn't refuse to wear the rainbow armband, I think, last year. He wore it, but wrote "Jesus loves you" on it, which is because of his religious beliefs. And this is a really complicated thing that is way beyond the pay grade of a football podcast. Like, where do we come down on Mark Gay's right to do that? Because that is Mark Gay's sincerely held religious belief.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's a... I think I'm right in saying he, at various points, he wrote "Jesus loves you," but I think he also wrote "I love Jesus" on the armband as well. And it was clearly one of those issues where the Premier League was just... There's such a kind of sensitivity about how do we, we didn't want to, how do we balance the kind of our desire for everybody to share this inclusive message with somebody kind of amending that message to represent their own religious beliefs in a way which has the apparent effect of undercutting the inclusivity, I think, of that gesture, and suddenly it becomes a thorny issue. And I think almost at moments like this, you can understand that I can understand the impulse that says maybe it would be better or safer to have almost no messaging of any form at all. There is part of me, and I know this is a really difficult topic, and I know that lots of people feel very strongly about this, but there is part of me that thinks actually all of this stuff, like certainly from the poppy and the rainbow laces and the armband, part of me thinks that it would almost be better to have almost no political content at all, because it will inevitably be so contested. And I know that in doing so, you are effectively shutting down those, you're shutting down the causes that people believe in, and you might make people feel less included. If I were in the position of running football, which fortunately I'm not, I think I could definitely see the upside in having nothing like this whatsoever, because it's always going to be argued about.
But that's just the thing is, so that just smacks of convenience, doesn't it? And
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a coward's position.
And we've seen it with World Cups where, I mean, the World Cup coming up next year, there's a lot of difficult political questions to be asked there over all types of issues, from human rights as at the down. And we've had it every World Cup that we've been involved in. Going back to South Africa, to Brazil, Russia in particular, Qatar. Well, I mean, that was a 12-year campaign of a discussion of human rights and politics and all that. Football is, in essence, a political game now, particularly on the world stage, particularly international football.
But I think Jack is right that once you start to consider any of these issues, you can understand why the various governing bodies, whether that's federations, leagues, associations, why their general stance is, I don't really want to get involved with that. That is and it's because it's complicated, because 99% of people will think the poppy is a completely harmless, not meaningless, but uncontroversial gesture honouring people who've given their lives in the country for war. But to James McLean, quite understandably, it's a symbol of British imperialism, and
yes.
we might not like that. Just as it's more offensive to me, not offensive, that's the wrong word, but it's more kind of controversial to me that Mark Gahey doesn't want to unquestioningly show that the LGBTQ people are welcome at football matches without making a religious point. But I totally get that that's his religion, and it's something that people outside football really struggle with. But I think that these are, I think as Jack says, it's quite a good example of how the Premier League and to an extent the EFL have really successfully depoliticised their spaces, which, John, and it feels a bit like coming to someone for their mastermind specialist subject here, is a bit of a contrast to the 1980s, when, as you point out with the scab chants between Yorkshire teams and Nottinghamshire teams, were inherently political. Like I mentioned about Ellen Road at the start, football was a really political space then.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the National Front aspect thing. I think if you went to games at that time, you would have people handing out socialist newspapers or even far right newspapers. It was a time where it was where groups of people came together. It was a political space where people shared ideas at a football game, and the Thatcher era was, of course, this great big change in society where essentially nationalised industries are torn up and sold off, in some cases taken out of business, and it's the deregulation to feed the capitalist ideas that she held. You go through the 1980s, you've got BP, BT, British Gas, all this stuff being sold off, regulated for the market. And then I think the Premier League in 1992, a little bit behind the curve, is that it's a deregulation of football. It's taking it away from the Football Association and the Football League and this sort of collective to serve those with the most money. And look at the people involved who did those deals. Rupert Murdoch, Alan Sugar. Now, Alan Sugar, Lord Sugar, as we should call him, was a Labour peer, but you cannot think of a more Thatcherite figure, really. I mean, it's a local boy made good. If you are of my age and you played ZX Spectrum, he's the guy that took over, bought Spectrum and off Clive Sinclair with Amstrad, and it was this very public businessman of the type that Margaret Thatcher represented. And of course, he did go on to own a football club alongside Terry Venables, controversially, and actually that has had ripples recently, hasn't it, with his recent spat with Jamie Redknapp. Now, football was the thing about Margaret Thatcher and football is she had no feeling for it whatsoever. If you think of, but she was a presence at a moment when football changed, and when you. I did an article for ESPN when I think the week that Margaret Thatcher died back in 2013. That would have been, and the picture they chose was a picture of Mrs. Thatcher going through the terraces at Hillsborough. She was the Prime Minister in charge then. Now, there is no more seismic day in English football than Hillsborough. And it was a day of change. It was the day when football had to wake up to itself that it wasn't safe to go to a football match. But obviously the Hillsborough, it remains an issue because of the fact that the families have not received the justice that they deserve. And if you look at the first Taylor report, which came out later in 1989, Margaret Thatcher's, we found, her letters were, this is critical of the police, because her thing was law and order. And so it's all bound in this idea of the enemy within, and football supporters were seen as the enemy within. Working class people having the ability to show rebellion against that law and order was a big part of the Thatcherite thing.
And she did see them, as you say, as kind of akin to the football fans in general.
Yes,
were in Thatcher's eyes akin to the miners. These were the enemies of the state. These were the forces she had to control.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the mob, isn't it? It's the idea. We mentioned the French Revolution. It's like, any prime minister or ruler of a country in whatever grade, the mob is what they don't want. When the mob turns against them, that's the problem, isn't it? And one of the great victories, I suppose, of Thatcherism is that she managed to divide and conquer and silo off these people. And football, which would have been a hotbed of insurrection, has been, as you said, limed off. It's been cleaned away. That doesn't happen at football.
I think this is the really interesting dynamic. It's very well known that she was no friend to football fans. She was not brought up in a sort of football environment, with all due respect to Grantham Town. But I think that the realities of what the Premier League from its inception in 1992, particularly the Premier League that we have now in the 21st century, is, I think, probably the ultimate legacy, or one of the ultimate Thatcherite legacies in British national life, in the sense that what the Premier League is really defined by more than anything else, and this is what makes its kind of depolitical nature so interesting, is that the Premier League is obviously built on a bedrock of politics. Like, the Premier League wasn't created in a vacuum. Like, the Premier League was created in 1992 because it had never had such a helpful political context to be born into, and that is an economy which was basically directed towards openness to foreign investment, openness to foreign labour, openness to foreign ideas. And this has really been what's turned the Premier League from what it was in 1992 through to the huge global force that it is now. And when you look at when you look at the kind of society that Thatcher created, I think to an extent kind of not unwillingly, but almost accidentally, she came in with this talk of, economics is the method, the aim is to change the heart and soul, I think was her famous line. But this idea of kind of taking Britain back to the sort of Victorian values, that never really happened. What she in fact did is just unleash a kind of unprecedented wave of capitalism and consumerism in the UK, and there is no better legacy than the Premier League itself.
I was going to say, do you think John mentioned earlier the other privatisations, Royal Mail, the trains, BT, which I remember, BP, all the Bs. I think you probably can make the case the Premier League is the most successful of them. I would argue that the privatisation of the trains has not benefited anybody except the shareholders. The privatisation of Royal Mail, I'm not sure things are better now. I quite like my every delivery guy, but apart from that, I mean, he's great. Don't know if the system is. I think you can look at it and say the Premier League is probably the only. I'm gonna say unmitigated success, but I think Miguel would probably take issue with that definition, wouldn't he?
I think I'd say it's not just the privatisations. It's privatisations and the opening up to foreign market. It's like the Big Bang in the City in 1986, allowing that level of foreign investment in and foreign firms to come and own UK brokers. I mean, I'm sure there's people. I'm sure we've got listeners who understand more about the Big Bang than me. Please leave your analysis of this in the Spotify comments. That, like, I think you can draw such a clear line between that, the creation of the Premier League, and then the thing that really set the Premier League off was foreign ownership.
Yes.
It was allowing, without the creation of the Premier League in 1992, you would not have so many Premier League clubs being sold to foreign owners, basically starting with, I guess, roughly Abramovich in 2003, leading all the way through, the Glazers, Taksin, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, and so on.
And then to be fair, the massive private equity boom, which I think Miguel's touched on this a bit, but to me is increasingly the ignored story of Premier League ownership, because we spend so much time focusing on the nation states. Private equity is probably changing football as rapidly.
But what could be more Thatcherite than that? Like, what could be more Thatcherite than let the market decide, leave it open to the market, have London as this, or have the UK, but specifically London really, as this kind of nexus for global investment, and everybody, will roll out the red carpet to anyone who can afford to come in and buy our assets. And like, there's nothing more, and so nothing could be a better legacy for her than this.
Happy birthday, Lady Thatcher. I think the best example of that, Jack and John, is that phrase of the Premier League about being ownership neutral.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is what they will say when you ask them about nation states or about private equity. They will say they do not care about the nature of the money as long as the money is real. That's all the Premier League cares about.
I think what they might say is ownership model neutral.
Okay.
There is a subtle but just about a distinction there. I think ownership model neutral, as in it's not that they don't have a view on the owners themselves. It's that they don't have a view on the different types of ownership. But yeah, I mean, clearly, regardless of which side of that line you fall down on, it's clear that this has been, I think, as integral to the success of the Premier League as the openness to foreign players, the openness to foreign managers, foreign broadcasters, foreign sponsors, foreign fans, and owners, whether it's sovereign wealth funds or politicians or oligarchs or as you say, private equity from the US. And I know that things have slightly changed, owners and directors test, but in the main, if you've got enough money, the red carpet is rolled out to you, and that has been the governing ideology of the Premier League, and that's why I think even though the Premier League is a depoliticized space, the Premier League is not apolitical. The Premier League rests on a very, very political set of assumptions, which very explicitly govern the UK in the late 80s, 90s, and a lot of the start of the 21st century. And that, I think, has really determined why English football is where it is, for both better and worse.
But if you think of it, you compare it to those companies you listed and I listed, the pattern is not dissimilar, is it? We're all paying more for what you used to get for not much, like a British Rail, bless its heart, was not the greatest service, but you weren't being charged ludicrous fees that you might have to do if you want to get an early train from London to Manchester. I mean, you could fly to Rio sometimes for the same as it would cost, and this letting the market decide. So the point of season ticket prices or season tickets being actually done away with because it suits clubs to sell it to individual foreign visitors, not just foreign visitors, tourists from wherever. It's the other thing is actually this is an interesting. When we talk about when we talk about the Premier League coming in, we talk about health and safety. Right back in the 90s, health and safety was this thing, which is a bit like woke now. It's like, oh yeah, it's all health and safety, isn't it? Now, actually, health and safety wasn't that bad an idea, really, because if you look at football grounds, they were deadly, right? And all-seater stadiums, health and safety, that. Well, actually, it did make it was safer for people to go to football. And weirdly enough, football had that. The Football Trust that was set up after Hillsborough meant that the Premier League, the top divisions, had better grounds. weirdly, football looked after its audience for a little bit in a way that remember Rail Track, which is which actually proved deadly because the market dictated that they didn't care too much about safety, and we ended up with some pretty horrific rail accidents. Football actually was responsible, and this is why I think Jack's right. It's a success story, whereas some of those other privatisations have been disastrous for the consumer.
But it's interesting, John. I've not thought of that. You mentioned quite rightly that the legacy of Thatcherism isn't just this big shiny Premier League. It's the fact that we are all being charged through the nose, whether that's to watch it live in a stadium,
to travel there, to whatever, yeah,
or to watch on TV. Like if you look at the cost of watching football now, it's extraordinary, and that is the flip side of the Thatcherite kind of model that the Premier League followed, which is it's, as Jack says, it's kind of this fetishization of consumerism, but there is at heart of consumerism is not in the interest of the consumer because it leads to the bleeding dry of that consumer. And I think I
was going to say, one of her greatest supporters, of course, Rupert Murdoch. Sky.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's no question that the Premier League is. There's an interesting thing that we may well discuss at some point down the line is what happens if, and I think really when, the Premier League decides to go OTT and do its own streaming platform, as they're already experimenting with through necessity in France. I'm not convinced that Sky as a model survives. Sky, I think, rests on the existence of the Premier League and the TV deal. I think that's why they have been so willing to pay through the nose for it, to keep it as theirs and see off ITV Digital and Setanta and TNT Sports, ESPN. But what's really interesting, and just want to get on this before we kind of go to some erotic music for the break, people seem to really resent the existence of controls on football's free market. And I'm thinking here of obviously of PSR, which is, I think, a deeply unpopular thing for a lot of fans. That one of the great kind of successes of the Premier League, I would say, and Sky have been complicit in this, is convincing people that the best thing that can happen is that you get a really rich owner. That is the dream for most clubs, is that an unfathomably wealthy individual or state or private equity fund takes you over and lets you buy more players or better players. To the extent that fans now, and you say like the Premier League is constructed on a very explicit set of political ideals, I think that's true. I'd argue as well that they've been internalised by fans who are now, when it comes to football, regardless of their external politics, extraordinarily extreme free marketeers.
Yeah, completely. And that it's such an interesting paradox, isn't it? That balance between the fact that the Premier League rests on this incredibly the unrestrained global market in which anybody, almost literally anyone from around the world, if you've got enough money, you can come and buy a team and invest in it and buy players and make the team good. And then obviously the Premier League has now, within recent years, decided to try and head back in, to slightly pivot back in the other direction with PSR, which we talked about on this show before. But in doing, but the problem with doing that is that most Premier League fans, I would say, have so much they've internalized that logic that the best thing that can happen to you in football is that somebody comes and buys you and spends lots of money on players. That all of a sudden that people think, oh no, you can't have you can't put these restrictions on us now. That's unfair. It's not just unfair. It's going against what you stand for. You stand for the unrestrained market. It's strange, really, isn't it? That I think English football in general has kind of struggled, I think, to get its head around the upside of things like PSR. And also, the Premier League itself has been incredibly squeamish about making the case for PSR in public.
Yes.
They almost literally haven't done it. They haven't done it at all. And I kind of understand on a political sense, they don't want to be seen to be at war with Manchester City or any of the other clubs. Yeah, and I kind of get why, and I get that because, in a sense, they are a members club and they don't want to. They appreciate they have to kind of adjudicate these disputes, but they don't necessarily want to kind of, go and take, be on the front foot and aggressive in public, making the argument. But I do think you can probably connect that squeamishness about making the argument for PSR in public, which they have failed to do, with the fact that the kind of the underpinning politics of the Premier League over the last 30 plus years has been for the untamed market.
And it's hard then to judge fans for feeling very kind of viscerally that's the unfairness of saying, actually, we're now not, we don't want to be completely untamed. We kind of want to tame it a little bit, just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, because it does feel as though the drawbridge has been brought up when they've been told for 30 years, probably by this stage, that the most exciting thing that can happen is that the little yellow chyron or cryon, however you say it, appears on the bottom of the Sky Sports News screen and says, Club X has been bought by China or, whatever. The nation state of Norway.
But I don't think that will be happening. But the thing is, though, but that Premier League thirst where there will always need to be more money, there always has to be more, has placed certain groups in positions I don't think they would ever thought themselves to be in, like Newcastle, essentially a left-wing city, right? It votes that way, is welcoming in a Saudi ownership, what that represents. There are very few big clubs that where the support. I mean, okay, take the Manchester United thing where big Sir Jim Ratcliffe bought in. That was against a Qatari bidder who, didn't come up with the money. I wonder about how the Manchester United fans reacted to that, because, United fans were very militant back in 2005 against the Glazer thing, and they ended up with Ratcliffe, which has turned out to be a dud. But would they be okay with the Qataris? Because
there was a section of the United fans, including Rio Ferdinand, who were impossibly excited by the idea of being sold to the state of Qatar. You are right that compare that to the reaction to the Glazers, because the Glazers was early on, and this applies to City as well. Like, we didn't know what was happening. We had never experienced. Like,
but those United fans that came out against the Glazers, they did. Let's be fair to them. They
absolutely, They saw it coming, but they. So one of the criticisms, this is getting way off topic, about the way the media covered, say, the Newcastle takeover, is that we gave that much more scrutiny immediately than Abramovich in 2003 or City in 2008.
Yeah.
And the reason is, we didn't know what was happening because we'd not lived through it before. We had no idea. Like, I wasn't a journalist in 2003. John, you might have been. Jack.
Yes, I was, yeah.
Or Jack was probably still at school. The
2003.
Were you in year 10 in 2003?
Wow.
That is upsetting.
When Abramovich came in, it was... My reaction was, wow, this looks a bit dodgy. And it did, we all knew what Russia... Yeltsin's Russia represented. We knew, that was out there. And so when one of their people comes into the Premier League, but we also knew that, and no one could do this, but I suppose everyone thought about it in their own way. It's like, well, what's it going to mean for my club? Because Chelsea are going to buy all the players now, and that's and so they think about it in a selfish way. There was a message the other day complaining we weren't talking about stuff that was bound by law. Now, that was the big problem with Abramovich. You couldn't complain about it because he had a very good legal team.
But also, I think I remember, because I was at university then, and I remember reading about that takeover in actual print newspapers, and the main reaction of the press, and I was a mirror reader then, John, mirror reader. The reaction of the press was just like baffled excitement. It was, hang on, this is nuts. I agree, there was an undertone of this money's probably not that clean, but it was fun and interesting and exciting, and then they started buying all those players.
And
when he appeared at Anfield, everyone was like, oh, look at this guy there, sat with his glamorous girlfriend, oh, listen, that exciting.
But I don't think that, I absolutely think with hindsight that English football should not have rolled out the red carpet in the way that it did to all sorts of people who bought clubs during the 2000s. You don't need to single one out because it's true of so many. At the same time, I find it difficult to blame English football in the way that some do, simply because this was just everywhere in the UK, right? Like, look at the City of London, look at the housing market, look at the education system. Like, this was absolutely the way that the UK was governed at the start of the 21st century.
Yes,
was just rolling out the red carpet.
Open for
You've got
business.
Enough money? Step right this way, sir. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah,
Let me show you around. And I think that while part of me thinks, oh, like English football really dropped the ball here. Like English football has not ended up in a good place after 20 years of this. I also don't really blame English football, because I just think it would have been weird for English football to swim against. English football would have really had to swim against the tide in order to say, no, actually, all this lovely foreign money, we don't want it. People just wouldn't have done that or said that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and there is that element of they could not see, just as with I'm no great fan of Thatcher, but they probably couldn't see the end consequences of privatising all these various things. My sense, looking at football now increasingly, we've seen it this week with the relaunch of the ECA as Everton Football Club or something, and Super Leagues and private equity and nation-state ownership and stuff. Like, it does feel like a game that everyone has lost control of. Football is now kind of out of control. No one really understands how to rein the horse back in. But I want to come back after the break and just talk about kind of the impact on us as fans and how we square the inherently political nature of the Premier League as a structure with the depolitical nature of the Premier League as an experience. Cue the music. Jack, I think you were in Belgrade for the England-Serbia game and heard some England fans chanting some stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was in Belgrade for the Serbia game, and I remember I was in a bar with Miguel, and
was he on his phone?
Oh yeah, you better believe it. And there was a bunch of England fans, and I thought in the main England fans were really well behaved in Belgrade. Like, it's one of those away games. I was a bit anxious going, like, would there be trouble? And I thought England fans actually behaved immaculately. That said, there were a bunch of England fans, not like millions, but let's say dozens, singing "Stop the boats, Nigel Farage, we're all voting for Reform UK." Like, I have not heard that at a Premier League game. That's not to say it hasn't happened at a Premier League game. I would not be surprised if that were more common in, say, Championship or League One. I mean, this is the weird thing about the England team, well, the experience of following England, particularly in away games, is that it kind of feels less like a Premier League crowd, and it feels more like a sort of Football League crowd. And so a lot of that political stuff, like Football Lads Alliance is, as far as I know, doesn't really exist anymore, but it was a thing which is fairly continuous with the big protest that we saw in central London recently, and it's a similar energy. Like, there was a time sort of 6-7 years ago where you would often see Football Lads Alliance flags and banners at England games and stickers. Like, a lot of this stuff is represented in, like, people make their stickers and it will have like Rupert Lowe on or Nigel Farage on, and they will kind of put them on lampposts on the way to the game. So yeah, like the England team has, or amongst people who support, particularly follow England away, you would not often hear this at Wembley. I'm certainly not expecting to hear it at Wembley when England play Wales tomorrow night. There is more of this kind of political stuff than you would get at any Premier League game.
That feels like a bit of a throwback, though, doesn't it? Like the 80s England fans. Now, not all of them are like that. One of my gaffers at The Guardian goes every England game God sends, and he certainly doesn't hold these views and is disgusted by this type of behaviour. But there is that element that goes back to that. There's that terrible story, isn't there, of John Barnes flying back from Brazil, having scored that amazing goal in American R, and people are essentially abusing him. England fans are abusing him. The player that scored this great goal for England, National Front members are on the flight. And
they told him the game finished. Does England won that game 2-0? Barnes scored the second, and the NF told him
draw,
that it was in a 1-0 win. Does the second goal didn't count?
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. And that element. I mean, I remember being at Euro 2016, and of course that took place. The Brexit vote happened halfway through that tournament, and I remember seeing at an airport an England fan deliberately going down the non-EU lane for a passport just to show off and like celebrate and like. Whoa.
But it's great how people aren't petty about it.
Yeah, and and that element has been there, and occasionally when I've travelled to England games, I don't do anymore. But yeah, there has been that element of this is old style, this is 80s, this is, and of course Tommy Robinson, whose real name is not Tommy Robinson, named himself after a Luton hooligan. Like, and so that aspect of things that lives in that space, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I remember being outside. Jack, you might have been there actually. Were you at England-Slovakia in 2016? Either of you?
No, I watched that. I watched that in a pub in Lille with Miguel.
I watched it in a pub in Bordeaux. It was awful, beyond awful.
Yeah, it wasn't a great. I watched it in the stadium.
Wow. Was that your last England game?
No, come on, no. My last England game was in the 2022 World Cup. But I only did one, and they got knocked out, and it was a blessed relief. That game. Afterwards, Saint-Étienne is, if anyone's ever been, is a relatively small town, an industrial town just outside Lyon, 40 minutes outside Lyon. We were waiting for the trains back, I think, probably to Lyon, where most of the media and a lot of the England fans, and presumably a lot of the Slovakian fans, were staying. And the trains didn't turn up, and it got to like 1, 2 in the morning outside Saint-Étienne train station. It was relatively cold, not freezing. But the mood in the queue, which was mainly English people by that stage, was relatively, it was quite, as Jack says, like there was no trouble. And there was quite a lot of kind of laddie banter. This would have been either immediately before or possibly after the Brexit vote. And
before. The Slovakia game was before.
Was it before? And the basic sort of, the patter was that the fans would vote to remain if they sent a train. And I can't remember how they made it rhyme or scan, and then I went to a game. There were chants. I can't remember if I was there. Whatever the game was afterwards, or there were chants of "We're all voting out. We're all voting out." So with England, there has always been that kind of political undercurrent. I think it is a performative Englishness that is done sort of to foreigners. And it tends to lean to the right. And as society shifted further to the right, I think that the England fans have kind of gone even further to the point now that there was Starmer as a wanker, I think, at one of the games recently. Stop the boats.
Yeah, that was the Andorra game.
But what's fascinating to me, and this brings us back to what we started talking about, you see none of that in the Premier League. I don't think there have been any incidents of any of that chanting in the Premier League. Why? Why do we think that is?
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? And I was talking to someone who works at Liverpool, who we all know. We were talking about this idea of Liverpool as a socialist club, right? Okay. There are certain fans that would like this idea that that Liverpool exists as some sort of socialist bastion of invincibility. When actually, look at the Moores family. I think John Moores was an actual Conservative councillor. He's a local businessman, made good, and obviously they owned Everton and Liverpool, the family. And it's the old style way of owning a club. Liverpool is not a socialist club. Many of the fans might be socialists, but even at Liverpool games, you don't get much socialist chanting, do you? You don't get...
You do, to be fair, actually, that's the point. You do get a lot of fuck the Tories. And in fact, I'd say that there was a spell...
Is that socialist rather than just...
It might just be anti-conservative, yeah, it's a fair point. No, there was actually a spell where they were chanting fuck the Tories a lot. And obviously actually around Thatcher's death, there was quite a lot of celebration of that particular incident. And I obviously know a lot of Liverpool fans who are long-standing matchgoers. There are plenty of people in the crowd at Anfield who basically think they don't really want to be chanting fuck the Tories. Not necessarily because they love the Tories, but because that's not really why they're there.
Yeah.
And I think it was loud enough that plenty of people were doing it, but people like swearing in public, John. That's the other thing you got to remember. People like swearing loudly in public. But I think it was something that quite a lot of fans felt, do we really have to do this again? Do you know what I mean?
There isn't a Premier League club that you would call socialist.
I don't think John Henry is a socialist.
No. I mean, it's just one of those things where there was a point where politics became very important in this country, remained so around Brexit or whatever, and and the Jeremy Corbyn revolution, such as it was, where it became this divisive thing, and football never really reflected that. Apart from your fuck the Tories chants, really, it's never, And the thing is, in politics these days, they say, don't they, that the power lies in the towns rather than the cities. That's one of the aspects of it, and that's what you get with the England fans. Is that's the provincial belief, and that's actually where the power lies in the electorate.
So, do we think that part of the reason the Premier League is a relatively depoliticised space then is because the nature of the crowds is either international or urban?
Metropolitan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Metropolitan.
Yeah, so I think that you can't look at this without looking at ticket prices. Like, I think that, again, ticket prices being left open to the untamed market, and I'm sure that clubs would say, well, they're not actually that untamed. It's not, the market's not that untamed in this sense, because we get yelled at whenever we put prices up too much. And I'm sure the clubs would like to put up prices even more.
Yeah, look how much Oasis charged. Yeah,
exactly. Or look how much it costs to go and watch games in an NFL game, for example, or NBA. Like, I do think that obviously clubs want to keep jacking the price up higher and higher, but to the extent that prices have gone up in the last 20 or so years, it's changed the social base of the crowd. Like, everybody knows this. It's often at the cost of the local communities who live in the immediate vicinity around the grounds and the clubs themselves. It's obviously attracted a new brand of fan, not just from outside the local area, but often from outside the UK as well. I think in many ways that can be a good thing. I go to Tottenham a lot. I think that having lots of Korean fans coming over to see Son is a good thing. I think they kind of add to the, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is. They add to the atmosphere. They add to the mood.
Diversity.
But clearly, if prices go up and you get a different bracket of fans coming to the game, then it becomes more of a I guess a kind of consumer space, right? It becomes less of a political space. I think there is less of a sense of solidarity and kind of shared experiences between people in the stands, between people other than the fact that they are coming to support the same team, than there used to be. And I think that really that kind of dilutes the possibility of any kind of shared political feeling.
Well, yeah, you don't get a lot of stop the boats chants at Oasis concerts. Like, it's an entertainment product, isn't it? Ultimately, people are going to be entertained.
Yeah, you pay your £1,500 season ticket, and I think that changes your relationship to the club and probably to the rest of the crowd as well.
So I think you're probably right, but I do have another theory that I want to run past you both, if that's all right, which might be like hopelessly naive. But I do wonder whether, to an extent, it's because... So it could be that we have a depoliticised Premier League because of the explicitly political sort of environment in which the Premier League has become a thing, which strips everything away and turns fans into consumers, and therefore detaches them and atomises them from any kind of shared sense of civic identity, right? That is a perfectly valid and I think probably the correct theory. But I do wonder if the opposite applies as well, that when you go to a stadium, when you go and watch your team, that is a form of identity. And your identity is as a Manchester United fan, as a Leeds fan, as a Tottenham fan. And those identities are inherently inclusive. But they're also... So anyone who, wherever you come from, in the stadium, you might grumble that the tourists don't know the songs. But I think most fans now basically understand that those international tourists, they've flown a long way, they've paid a lot of money, they help to kind of create the value in the brand which enables the club to waste money on Alexander Isak or whatever. That's a different subject, we did that the other day. But it's also an inclusive identity. Once you're in the stadium and you're cheering for a team, you are expressing an identity. And I do wonder whether so much of the kind of fracturing of society and the rise of certain types of politics is to do with the loss of identity, that maybe a football stadium is the last bastion where there is one. And so you don't need to engage in other types of politics. You don't want to bring in division that might separate the crowd because your identity is there in front of you, if that makes sense.
And being a football fan has never been a stronger identity than it is now. Like, it's, there has been obviously been a huge social change in the last 50 years between the idea of, like, this is a bit of a characterization, but the difference between I go to Anfield on a Saturday and I am a Liverpool fan, right? Like, fandom is now something that you do 24/7, and I think that's largely been enabled by tech more than anything else, right? Like, because you can follow all the accounts and you can post your memes and you can go on the message boards. Like, you can, if you're a Liverpool fan, and it could be it's the same for any club. It's not just going to the game once a week, or maybe an away game as well, or like being part of a supporters club with a little magazine, or reading the programme, or putting up posters on your wall. It's a 24/7 act. Like, fandom is a 24/7 activity, and it's a 24/7 identity as well. And I think that you're probably right. I think that is such a powerful part. That's such a powerful thing to people, particularly now in a world where the other kind of building blocks of identity, the building blocks of civic life, have been undermined so much that maybe people don't want to then draw a line between me and the other 50,000 fans of my team.
Or even that it's the most important bit. So it's really glib, and lots of people have made this point. But like, if you look at the number of people on social media whose bios are football club, other hobby / politics, family, like the role that, like, we joked at the start about not having an identity outside of our employment, which is true of most journalists, but like, a lot of people, the central plank of their identity is who they support. That is, they might be a husband, a father, a wife, a mother, whatever, brother, sister, but in terms of kind of anything extraneous to the stuff that's kind of the basic human condition, son, daughter, all that stuff, then a lot of it, the first thing that they think of is the football team. So when you're in the stadium chanting for your football team, you're actually not thinking about the other political views that you hold a lot of the time. They just aren't relevant in that moment, because you are performing, in that sort of wanky phrase, you are performing the main part of your identity. So why would you think, well, actually, I don't like trans people? That's just not relevant to you in that moment.
The thing is, though, if you go back to the 80s, the identity of a football fan was very strong, because it was one of the... Back in that time, you had tribes of people. So you would have, as a youth movement, remember, football fans are older now than they used to be. I mean, obviously you had older people, but it was a youth movement in itself. Being a football fan, travelling up and down the country on a football special or whatever, which you could do for a lot less money, that had its identity, didn't it? That was the identity that people, and that's hooliganism was part of that. It was, and that identity, as part of the Premier League, has been sold. And it's the type of thing that we've mocked before about, when it's a Liverpool, Man United, and they'll sell it with some performance poetry and, the fizzing pint in the pub and all this type of thing.
But I love the performance poetry.
Yeah, the performance poetry.
Manchester.
All right, yeah.
Chimney stacks and your mum's brew, yeah.
And then it's like, all right, yeah, we've got, is the Maisie lilts down, yeah, all that stuff, And but that identity has been sold off, commodified. Yeah. It's that word again, isn't it? And and people were wearing trainers that they wore, that hooligans wore in the 80s. They're wearing gear that they wore in the 80s. The whole 80s thing is cool still, but it's not the same. And that identity that people had then, like, you're an outsider if you're a football fan a lot of the time in the 1980s. Oh, that guy, he goes to the football. Even though
Whereas now, and this is Jack's line, so I should probably let him deliver it. It's a culture that you have to opt out of rather than opt into.
100%. Yeah.
It's like the difference between Christianity in the UK 100 years ago and now, right? Like, like 100 years ago, it would just be assumed that you were a churchgoer, unless you kind of conscientiously decided to take yourself out of that space. Whereas now, the opposite is true, and I almost think that the same is almost true of football, right? Like, football used to be something you opted into because it didn't kind of cover the whole country, but now it's kind of assumed that you do like it. And that's the funny thing about Thatcher, right? Is that when she was Prime Minister, football will have felt, or certainly in her mind, this is a kind of bad niche thing that I want to kind of stamp down on and can control. And now, 30 years on, it's become something which is now so big that it's so big and kind of glitzy and shiny and capitalist that it's almost impossible to escape.
I was going to say, it reflected the neglect in society, didn't it, football at the time, which was part of her, and not just her, I mean, the governments before, like Britain was a fading nation, and the football stadiums were dying off. She didn't know how to sort these, because it's a big problem. If you're the Prime Minister of a country and you've got stadiums on fire, you've got hooligans, you've got disasters like Hillsborough, I mean, it's small wonder that she thought it was a problem. Problem is she didn't want to do anything about it. She's just like, just let them.
Well, I think there's a story. I think it's to do with Euro '88 that and we've gone way over now. Sorry, Tom. She I think actively encouraged the FA not to enter that tournament. England had qualified, and I think she said there was governmental advice to the FA, like you should maybe think about not going. Like British people should not be abroad. This is a bad idea. Like allowing English people particularly to go to foreign countries, just asking for trouble, and that's obviously 3 years after Heysel and in the height of the European ban, a year before Hillsborough, and it was seen, I think, by Thatcher and her government as though football was kind of an enemy of the state. Effectively, this was a genuine problem for British society. The difference now is that football effectively is the state. That football is our identity. It is the central plank of our culture. It's, we talk about like the Premier League and the soft power and stuff that it gives Britain, but it's absolutely true. It's one of the few things that people kind of actually still like about Britain.
Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have to be seen front and centre with football in a way
well, this is it. You can't pretend not. You have to pretend to like football. And one of the ironies of lots of people have made this point. One of the ironies of the sort of the distrust of politicians, I guess, is that Keir Starmer is a genuine football fan.
And so was Rishi as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but we think they're not.
Yeah.
We think they're lying. Does we think, you have to say you like football? John, I'm really disappointed to do this because I thought your point about the commodification of tribalism is fascinating. I think we should probably do a separate podcast on that. If you have enjoyed this episode, which if you've made it through more than an hour of it, I suspect you have, or at least you've persisted, well done, then please feel free to write that down in some form, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, just on social media. Tell your friends, tell the person next to you at High Rocks. I don't know what High Rocks is, but people are doing it a lot. We need your help to get the word out there, to help us to compete with the real Thatcherite architects of capitalism, who were all, like most people in the 1980s, called Gary. Thank you very much to Jack. Thank you to John. We'll see you again next week.
Nice one.
Powered by Riverside.